What if I told you the very people you're afraid to lose are the ones quietly tearing you apart? Every fake smile you force, every one-sided relationship you hold on to eats away at your focus, your peace, and your potential. Who in your life offers comfort but never truth? Who have you kept around, not because they deserve it, but because you're afraid of what their absence might reveal about your silence? Power isn't built by adding more people, it's built by subtraction. The world says to network, to expand, to be likable. But Stoic wisdom reminds us, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. We stay chained to dead weight, not out of love, but out of fear. This isn't just about cutting off the toxic, it's about reclaiming your clarity. The real danger isn't the enemy outside, it's the weakness you allow inside your circle. And if you're brave enough to face that truth, you're already ahead of most. If you're walking this path towards stillness, self-mastery, and inner strength, subscribe. Think of it as a vow to raise your standards, live deliberately, and guard your peace like the treasure it is. Agreement feels warm. It's quiet, smooth, and easy. Someone nods as you speak, echoes your opinions, supports your every move, and for a moment you feel seen, understood, backed. But it's in that very silence where the first cracks begin to form. Because what looks like loyalty is often just self-preservation in disguise. Not everyone who agrees with you is on your side. In fact, the person who never disagrees with you might be the one who's already preparing to disappear when you need them most. True loyalty has weight, it has shape, it risks tension, disagreement, and discomfort. But most people aren't looking for truth. They're looking for protection by blending in, not standing out. So they adapt, they mirror your energy. They become agreeable, not out of conviction, but out of calculation. Think about the last time someone backed your decision but disappeared when it failed. The moment things got difficult, they retreated, distanced themselves, acted like they never had a voice in it to begin with. That wasn't betrayal in the loud, obvious sense. It was abandonment dressed in politeness. That's the danger of the agreeable. Their silence feels supportive until it becomes invisible. Epictetus once said, "It is better to be rebuked by the wise than to be praised by the ignorant." And it's true. The person who cares enough to challenge you, to say you're wrong or you're drifting, is the one whose loyalty is built on truth, not transaction. Real allies are not echoes, they're anchors. They stand with you, not because it's easy, but because it's right. But our culture doesn't teach us to value that. It teaches us to seek comfort, to surround ourselves with those who make us feel good, not those who make us better. So we collect people who validate us, mirror us, smile at us, but who vanish the second our foundation shakes. These are not friends, they are spectators. And the moment you start climbing higher, they either grow silent or they applaud without meaning a word. Because they were never invested in your growth. They were invested in staying close to your light without ever carrying the fire themselves. Carl Jung understood this duplicity deeply. He believed that people wear masks not only to deceive others, but to avoid confronting their own contradictions. And so do your agreeable companions. They're not lying to hurt you, they're lying to survive. Their agreement is a shield, a way to remain accepted, to stay near influence, to protect themselves from scrutiny. But when pressure comes, when truth is required, their survival instinct kicks in, and their silence becomes absence. And that's when you learn. Loyalty that costs nothing means nothing. Real loyalty is disruptive. It interrupts you when you're drifting. It confronts you when you're in denial. It speaks up even when the room is tense. These are the people you should build with, not those who flatter, but those who speak the difficult truth without fear of losing proximity. Loyalty is not passive, it's participatory. A loyal person engages, they offer feedback, they challenge assumptions, they bring their full self into the relationship, not just their agreement, but their honesty, and when they disagree, they do so from a place of respect, not rebellion. That's the difference between the loyal and the silent. The loyal risk being uncomfortable. The silent avoid it at all costs. Seneca wrote, "The friendship which can cease has never been real." The same can be said of loyalty. If someone's presence in your life is only secure when things are easy, when you're right, when you're shining, then their loyalty isn't loyalty at all. It's comfort, it's self-interest, it's conditional presence. And you can't build anything stable on that. You can't rise with people who only nod but never speak. Their silence may feel like support now, but eventually it will become the loudest void you've ever heard. So start watching more closely. Listen to who challenges you, not with hostility, but with care. Notice who dares to say, "I don't agree with you," and still stays beside you. That's a rare thing. It's a powerful thing. And it's something you can't afford to overlook, because the people who never disagree with you aren't proving their loyalty. They're hiding their true position. They're watching you closely, learning your habits, adopting your language, not because they believe in you, but because it's safer than standing apart. And when the storm comes, when your judgment is tested, when the decisions you made begin to break, those same people will vanish. Or worse, they'll say, "I never really believed in it anyway." Not because they were against you, but because they were never with you to begin with. Their loyalty was never to you. It was to their own comfort. You deserve better than that. You deserve people who are not afraid to tell you the truth even when it stings, who remain when things fall apart, who challenge you not to break you, but to build you. That's real loyalty. And it's far rarer than most people think in a world full of agreeable faces. Be someone who values the voice that dares to speak. Because the ones who stay silent to keep the peace will leave quietly when that peace is gone. And you'll be left wondering if they were ever truly there. They'll tell you they're just having a bad day, then another, then another. One moment they're bursting with ambition, full of dreams and declarations, and the next they're drowning in doubt, pulling you down with silent despair. They don't lash out. They don't sabotage you with obvious harm. They collapse, slowly, quietly, and in the process, they ask you to carry not just their weight, but their instability. At first it seems innocent, just someone you care about having a rough time, but over time their inconsistency becomes the atmosphere you breathe. Their moods dictate your peace. Their confusion clouds your clarity. You find yourself adjusting, shrinking, compensating, not because they demand it, but because they never stabilize. And when someone can't find their footing, they begin to lean on yours. This isn't support, it's slow erosion. It's what Carl Jung described as the danger of identification. When one person's emotional wounds begin to blur the edges of another's identity, you don't notice it right away. It begins subtly. You excuse it, you empathize, you stay patient, because you're a good person, because you believe people can change. And they can, but not everyone will, and not everyone wants to. Some people are more committed to their patterns than their potential. They want your presence, not your progress, your time, but not your truth. And when you start to rise, they don't stand beside you. They panic, because the higher you go, the more their unresolved pain is exposed. So they pull, not violently, not obviously, but emotionally, through guilt, through helplessness, through silence that demands your attention. Their suffering becomes a performance you're expected to attend day after day. Stoic philosophy teaches that we should never surrender what is ours, our reason, our focus, our direction, to that which lies outside of our control. And yet emotional inconsistency is a thief that works quietly, convincing you that your reaction is responsibility. But it's not. Their mood swings aren't your fault. Their chaos isn't your cross to carry. There's a difference between helping and absorbing, between empathy and entanglement. And if someone's unpredictability makes your peace conditional, that's not love. That's dependence disguised as connection. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." But what happens when the soul begins to absorb someone else's? The collapse of a relationship built on emotional inconsistency doesn't happen all at once. It happens when you wake up more tired than rested, when your excitement begins to feel like guilt, when your wins are followed by their silences, their distance, their subtle sabotage. It's not envy in the open, it's self-sabotage that disguises itself as need. And if you're not careful, you'll start to feel responsible for carrying both lives, for fixing moods that were never yours to manage, for being the foundation of someone who refuses to stand on their own. You are not here to babysit broken boundaries, you're here to build. And building requires stability. It requires energy that multiplies, not energy that evaporates every time someone close to you forgets how to stand on their own. The difficult truth is this: not everyone can go where you're going, not because they're evil, not because they hate you, but because they're still searching for a reason to move forward. And sometimes they see your direction as a threat, a mirror reflecting back everything they haven't faced. And instead of rising with you, they fold and ask you, without words, to carry both the map and their indecision. Seneca warned that life is long if you know how to use it. But time spent managing emotional inconsistency isn't life, it's limbo. It keeps you tethered to cycles that never end, conversations that repeat, apologies that come too late, promises that disappear in the morning. And the more you invest in someone who won't stabilize, the more your own balance suffers. This doesn't mean you become cold, it means you become clear. Compassion without boundaries isn't noble, it's neglect of yourself. You are allowed to say, "I love you, but I cannot hold you up anymore." That is not abandonment, that is maturity. You build with people who've done the work, who've faced their storms and learned how to walk again, who bring energy into the space, not confusion, who don't need rescuing every time reality strikes. These are the ones who will hold you when you fall, who won't make your success a source of shame, who won't shrink every time you expand. They're not perfect, but they're consistent, grounded, and that kind of person doesn't drain you. They sharpen you, they give, they don't just take. And when the weight of life shows up, they carry it with you, not ask you to carry them. The people in your life either become your peace or your pressure. They either water your growth or make you question your own roots. It's not about judgment, it's about discernment. And once you begin to value your time, your energy, and your clarity, you'll stop calling inconsistency potential. You'll start calling it what it is, instability, and you'll stop negotiating with it. Because when you allow inconsistency to stay, it doesn't stay still, it spreads. It shapes your days, it rewires your tolerance, it makes dysfunction feel normal, and that's not a life rooted in strength. That's a slow surrender. You are not cold for walking away from emotional chaos. You are not cruel for choosing stability over sympathy. You are allowed to protect your focus, your future, your fire. As Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And who you truly are cannot emerge in an environment of constant volatility. So if someone's presence is built on collapse, let them fall, not because you want them to fail, but because you refuse to follow. And that too is love, the kind that knows when to stay and when to let go. There's a strange discomfort in being around someone who talks too much. But not because they're excited or enthusiastic. It's something else. They overexplain. They justify things you never questioned. They rush to explain why they were late before you've even asked. They preemptively clarify what they said yesterday, why it came out wrong, how it wasn't what they meant, and why it's not fair for you to misunderstand. At first, it seems harmless, maybe even considerate, but when you step back, you start to see the pattern. These aren't people trying to connect, they're people trying to manage perception. Every word is a defense, not a dialogue. Every explanation is a shield, not a truth. And the more they talk, the less you actually know them. Over-explanation is not a sign of honesty. It's a subtle confession that the truth can't stand on its own. The constant need to control the narrative, to soften the edges of their behavior, isn't transparency. It's anticipation of judgment. It's damage control before damage has even occurred. Because deep down, they know their actions don't align with their image, and they're hoping that if they talk fast enough, long enough, you won't stop to examine the gap between what they say and what they do. Marcus Aurelius reminded us to waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. But over-explainers don't live by this. They argue, they elaborate, they decorate their failures with carefully chosen words in the hope that the truth gets blurred before it gets seen. We live in a world where words are cheap and plentiful, but character is quiet. The person who stands in truth doesn't need to sell themselves to you. Their consistency does that for them. Their presence holds weight without shouting. They aren't perfect, but they own their imperfection with steadiness, not spin. Carl Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And it's true. The ones who rely too heavily on language are often trying to cover the absence of integrity. They fear the silence because in silence, actions echo, and their actions can't hold that weight alone. When someone constantly feels the need to narrate their intentions, reinterpret their behaviors, or reframe every misstep before you even raise an eyebrow, ask yourself, why the urgency? Why the fear? Because when people are grounded in truth, they can afford pauses. They can let their actions speak, even when those actions aren't perfect, because they trust that their patterns will tell the story. They don't need to sculpt the narrative around each individual moment. They know that who they are will show itself over time. But over-explainers live moment to moment, constantly patching holes, afraid that if they stop talking, the illusion will fall apart. And it's not always malicious. Often it's insecurity. It's a deep-rooted fear of being misunderstood, of being disliked, of losing control. But that doesn't make it harmless, because when someone is always on the defensive, even when there's no offense, you end up carrying their anxiety. You start questioning your own instincts. You begin second-guessing your perceptions. Their performance becomes your confusion. And eventually, your clarity, the clarity that Stoicism values above all, gets clouded by the sheer noise of their explanations. It's also a control tactic, whether conscious or not. By flooding the space with justifications, they're not just avoiding accountability, they're overriding your right to form your own interpretation. They want to decide how you see them, rather than letting you observe and conclude for yourself. And when someone is afraid of your honest judgment, they will try to narrate their way into innocence again and again. But innocence doesn't require a monologue. Innocence holds still. It doesn't fear being misunderstood because it knows the truth survives silence. Seneca taught that a man's worth is no greater than his ambitions. But I'd add, his worth is also revealed in how he handles being seen. People who are comfortable with themselves don't need to explain their every move. They let their intentions unfold naturally, knowing they may be misread at times, but choosing integrity over image. They're okay being misunderstood because they know who they are when no one is watching. Overexplainers, on the other hand, live as if they're always being watched and judged and must constantly perform to stay safe. Eventually, you learn to stop listening to what's being said and start observing what's being done. And when you do, the picture gets clearer. The person who explains too much is often hiding too much. They're trying to stay one step ahead of your perception because they don't trust that their choices, on their own, would hold up under real scrutiny. And the moment you stop giving them the reaction they want, they panic. Not because you've been unfair, but because their mask starts slipping without the glue of constant narration. Watch how people act in silence. Notice how they behave when they're not defending themselves. See who shows up without needing applause, who apologizes without a prepared speech, who admits fault without spiraling into justification. That's where real trust is built. Not in words, but in presence. Not in explanations, but in patterns. And when someone has to constantly manage your view of them, they don't trust themselves, and they're asking you to do the emotional labor of maintaining the image they've created. You don't owe anyone that. You're not here to be manipulated by well-crafted words or emotionally packaged excuses. You're here to observe, to learn, to protect your energy by trusting patterns more than promises. People reveal themselves not in what they say, but in what they repeat, and the person who talks you into trusting them is usually the one you should trust the least. Let their silence speak. Let their actions echo. And when the words pile up too fast, ask yourself, what truth are they trying so hard to keep buried? Because what is real never needs convincing. It just is. They come into your life quietly, usually with admiration. They echo your language, pick up your tone, start quoting your ideas like they've lived them. At first, it feels like alignment, like someone finally understands you, like you've found a kindred spirit. But slowly, something feels off. It's not just that they're agreeing with you, it's that they're becoming you. Mannerisms, phrases, even your values, they mirror it all. But imitation, no matter how convincing, lacks one essential element: belief. Because what they've absorbed isn't your essence, it's your image. And when the environment changes, when your path shifts, or when you stop feeding them direction, they start to disappear. Or worse, they reinvent themselves in someone else's shadow, just like they did in yours. Some people would rather become whatever the moment rewards. They adapt, not to grow, but to survive. And in survival mode, authenticity is discarded for approval. These are not strategists with a plan. They're chameleons with no center. They're not building anything real. They're blending, hiding behind borrowed beliefs and recycled personas. They know how to say the right things in the right rooms, but when those rooms change, so do they. Because at their core, they aren't anchored to anything deeper than proximity to power or relevance. When someone builds a connection based entirely on imitation, it may feel flattering at first, even familiar. But there's a difference between resonance and replication. True connection is born when two people stand in their own truth and meet eye to eye, not when one follows and mimics to maintain closeness. It might be subtle at first. They adopt your philosophy. They mirror your routines. They adjust their goals to align with yours. But the closer they get, the more you'll start to feel it, this uneasy sense that you're being followed, not joined. You'll notice that when you slow down, they slow down. When you shift course, they shift too. Not out of shared vision, but out of fear of losing access. That's not loyalty. It's dependency in disguise. And this dependency is fragile. The moment you create distance or challenge them to stand on their own, the cracks show. They become confused, even resentful. They might lash out or ghost you altogether, because their connection to you wasn't built on mutual respect. It was built on mimicry. and mimicry cannot survive without constant exposure to the source. Epictetus taught that it is impossible for a man to learn what he thinks he already knows. The chameleon already believes they've mastered your path because they've rehearsed it so well. But rehearsed wisdom isn't lived wisdom, and when life tests their imitation, it falls apart. This is why you must learn to separate those who walk with you from those who walk in your shadow. A shadow always disappears when the light changes. Real people remain. They don't need to imitate you because they're busy becoming themselves. They may admire you, be inspired by you, even learn from you, but they will never dilute themselves to match you because their identity isn't threatened by yours. In fact, they want to be challenged. Anchors don't drift. They stay grounded, not by copying, but by contributing something distinct. They bring perspective, friction, honesty, qualities that demand self-awareness and inner strength. You don't need echoes in your life. You need anchors. People who don't vanish when the season changes. People who stay rooted in their own truth while helping you grow in yours. Because relationships built on imitation breed silence. No new ideas, no growth, just repetition. And over time, that becomes suffocating. You find yourself drained, not by conflict, but by the constant emptiness of being around someone who only reflects and never reveals. And as flattering as it may seem, there's something profoundly lonely about being surrounded by mirrors. Even Socrates, in his relentless pursuit of truth, warned against the false comfort of unexamined lives. A person who imitates others without ever turning inward is living a life borrowed, not built. Their words don't originate from experience. Their values don't rise from hardship or reflection. They simply adopt what seems to work. But life eventually reveals what's real. Trials test conviction. Pressure exposes pretenders. And when the time comes, the chameleon slips away, looking for another skin to wear. That's why discernment matters. Look closely at the people around you. Do they challenge you? Offer new perspectives? Hold their ground when they disagree? Or do they simply conform to your rhythm because it's safer than being seen? The Stoics taught that clarity begins with courage. The courage to see people for who they are, not just for how they appear when they agree with you. And once you see through imitation, you can't unsee it. You start recognizing when someone is curating themselves instead of expressing themselves. And in that moment, you have a choice. Continue nurturing a reflection or seek out real relationships. Let your circle be made of those who have roots, not masks. People who don't just blend in when it's convenient, but who stand firm when it's hard. Because if everyone around you is simply echoing your thoughts, your vision is being distorted. You're no longer evolving. You're being applauded by an audience that doesn't know the meaning of silence, let alone substance. Choose those who don't need to become you to respect you. Choose those who don't follow your path, but walk alongside you on their own. Because power doesn't come from being imitated, it comes from standing beside those strong enough to stand alone. Some people don't walk into your life, they rush in. From the very beginning, they open up, fast, too fast. Within hours of knowing you, they're sharing the deepest parts of their past, exposing wounds that most people take years to speak about. They confess traumas, tell you secrets, and swear this connection is unlike anything they've ever felt. And at first, you might mistake it for trust, for vulnerability, for something real, but it isn't. It's performance. It's a tactic disguised as truth, because intimacy, when it's genuine, is never rushed. It unfolds slowly, quietly, authentically. What they're offering isn't intimacy, it's manufactured closeness. And it's not for your benefit, it's for control. This kind of emotional fast-tracking isn't about bonding, it's about anchoring you, about making you feel so emotionally entangled so early on that any attempt to create space later feels like abandonment. And when you do try to pull back, when your intuition tells you that something doesn't feel right, they don't react with grace. They remind you of how much they shared, how close you've become, how you must care, because they were so open with you. But openness without boundaries is not vulnerability, it's manipulation. It's a carefully disguised way to force guilt into what should be freedom. It's what Carl Jung warned against when he spoke of projection, because what they share isn't always about connection. It's about using you as a container for feelings they refuse to process alone. Manufactured intimacy creates confusion. On the surface, it feels flattering. Someone is letting you in. They're trusting you. They're choosing you. But real vulnerability doesn't come without context or pace or discernment. And when it does, it's not something that demands reciprocity. It invites it gently when the time is right. The kind of forced closeness we're talking about feels different. It's sticky, it's rushed, it's drenched in emotion but lacking in depth. Because what's happening isn't trust, it's pressure. You're being emotionally cornered into a role you didn't ask for. Not a friend, not a partner, a savior, a therapist, a witness to chaos you never signed up to hold. The Stoics believed in measured connection, in being slow to speak, slow to trust, and quick to observe. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. But this kind of emotional flooding doesn't give you time to react. It overwhelms you, making reflection almost impossible. And before you know it, you're pulled into their storm, not by force, but by sentiment. You didn't fall into a relationship. You were dragged into an emotional contract you never had a chance to read. And this is where the sabotage begins. You start feeling responsible for their emotional well-being. You begin censoring yourself to avoid triggering their insecurity. You avoid distance, not because you want closeness, but because you're afraid of how they'll respond. You fear being called cold, distant, uncaring. They don't ask for love, they demand proof of it, constantly. And if you don't give it, they make you feel like you've broken something sacred, something you never agreed to in the first place. This is why trauma bonding is so dangerous. It bypasses the natural process of trust. Instead of growing together, you're trauma welded. Their wounds become the glue, and the more you try to detach, the more they bleed on purpose, just to keep you close. True intimacy, by contrast, is slow and steady. It's not built on what's said in week one. It's built on what's shown in year one. Through action, through consistency, through the quiet, unspoken signals that say, I'm here, I see you. I don't need to dump my past to prove it. Aristotle believed that true friendship is based not on usefulness or pleasure, but on goodness, on mutual respect, on time-tested virtue. But manufactured intimacy skips all of that. It's fast food connection, high emotional calories, but no nourishment. It leaves you full and empty at the same time. And when the emotions fade, as they always do, you're left with someone who doesn't really know you and doesn't want to. They just wanted someone to cling to, someone to anchor their chaos. And if that someone isn't you anymore, they'll move on, fast, just like they arrived. The hard part is recognizing it while you're in it, because it's easy to confuse intensity with depth. But depth is quiet. It doesn't demand. It doesn't rush. It respects space, pace, and silence. You'll know it not by how quickly someone shares, but by how patiently they listen. Not by how much they reveal, but by how they respond when you say no, or not yet, or I need time. The person who honors your boundaries, even when it frustrates them, is the one worth trusting, not the one who floods you with feeling to fast-track your loyalty. So if someone tries to bond too quickly, if they turn your early conversations into confessionals, if they ask for emotional favors you haven't had time to earn, pay attention. They're not looking for connection. They're looking for control. And it's okay to step back, to say, this is too much, too soon, to protect your peace without apology, because true closeness is never coerced. It's chosen again and again through presence, not pressure. And when you remember that, you stop falling for the illusion of intimacy. You start choosing what's real. You start protecting your inner life not just from harm, but from intrusion. And you realize being loved is not about how quickly someone gets close to you. It's about how well they hold space while they earn the right to stay. They always seem to know what no one else does. The ones who come bearing whispers, warnings, stories laced with drama, and just enough truth to sound credible. They smile as they pour the tea, make you feel like you're special for hearing it, like you're in the inner circle. But while you're listening, while you're laughing, while you're nodding in quiet agreement, something else is happening beneath the surface. They're not just informing you, they're conditioning you, grooming you into a space where gossip feels like connection, where shared secrets masquerade as trust. But the price you pay for that moment of inside knowledge is far higher than it first appears. Because gossip is rarely innocent. It's rarely just entertainment. It's a tool. Sometimes it's a shield. Sometimes it's a weapon. But it's always a signal that the person delivering it lacks boundaries, that they carry people's reputations in their hands like they're holding water, loose, careless, spilling everywhere. They dress it up in smiles, in concern, even in fake empathy. I just thought you should know. Don't tell anyone I said this, but... And in those phrases, what they're really saying is, I trade in people's names, and I will spend yours too. Marcus Aurelius warned, the things you think about determine the quality of your mind. But the gossiper wants to fill your mind with noise, other people's failures, private matters, missteps you were never meant to see. Because gossip, by its nature, drags your attention downward. It tempts you to judge instead of reflect, to feel superior instead of curious. It invites you into a loop of suspicion and distraction, keeping your focus on what others are doing wrong instead of what you should be doing better. And the longer you stay in that loop, the easier it becomes to forget that you were never meant to be there in the first place. It often starts with charm. They're witty, observant, socially sharp. They always seem to have the latest story, and at first it feels harmless, maybe even useful. But the more you let them speak, the more you realize they're not just telling stories, they're practicing a craft that carves wedges between people, one whisper at a time. And those wedges don't just separate you from others, they separate you from yourself. You start questioning people you used to trust. You start filtering every conversation through the lens of doubt. Because the moment you hear one thing, you assume two more. You start wondering, what are they saying about me when I'm not in the room? And that's the core truth. The one who brings gossip is the one who will carry your name into the next conversation. Carl Jung once said, shame is a soul-eating emotion, and gossip is shame weaponized. It's the spreading of shadows before the person has a chance to stand in the light. It's often based on fragments, half-truths, or interpretations warped by ego. And when your name becomes part of that economy, your character is no longer your own. It gets shaped in spaces you've never entered, by people you've never met, because someone else decided your story was easier to sell than to understand. That's the danger. You won't know when it starts. You won't see the fire until it's already spread. And by the time the damage is visible, the trust you've spent years building has been eroded by invisible hands. Gossipers don't burn bridges with flames. They do it with smoke, with suspicion, suggestion, with the soft corrosion of what people believe before they ever meet you. Their power is quiet, but that doesn't make it any less dangerous. You don't need to confront them. You don't need to match their energy. You just need to step away, without drama, without warning, without becoming another story they tell. Let your silence be your boundary. Let your absence protect your name. Epictetus taught that we should never argue with fools, because people watching may not be able to tell the difference. The same applies here. If you fight a gossiper, you step into their arena. You validate their method, but if you walk away, if you become unavailable to their narratives, you deny them the one thing they need most: access. And once you do, something powerful happens. Your life becomes cleaner, quieter, more yours. You stop carrying the weight of conversations that were never meant to happen. You stop wondering what other people think of you, because the people who matter will speak to you, not about you. You begin to realize that real relationships are built on discretion, on loyalty and silence, on respect when no one's watching. The ones worth keeping are the ones who protect your name like it's their own. Not because you're perfect, but because they understand that everyone deserves the dignity of being known directly, not interpreted through someone else's mouth. Seneca said, "Associate with those who will make a better man of you." And gossipers by nature make you worse, not because they change your values, but because they distract you from them. They pull your attention into places of noise and ego and petty comparison when your life should be directed toward clarity, action, and stillness. The longer you sit at the table where other people's reputations are the main course, the more likely it is that your own will end up on the plate. You don't need to hate them. You don't need to expose them. You just need to refuse to be near them. Because some people don't need to be confronted. They just need to be uninvited. And when you do that, you don't just protect your peace. You start raising the standards of the space around you. Your silence sends a message. Your distance draws a line. And over time, the people who respect you will know exactly where you stand, not just by what you say, but by what you no longer allow. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can say is nothing. Not because you're afraid, not because you don't have the words, but because you've already seen enough. You've watched the same pattern repeat, again and again, promises made, broken just as quickly, excuses rehearsed, apologies that sound more like strategies than sincerity. At some point, you stop needing more evidence. You just see it for what it is, a cycle, not a one-time mistake. And the truth is, once you truly see it, there's nothing left to explain. No confrontation to stage, no speech that will fix what they were never interested in preserving. We live in a culture obsessed with closure. We're told to write it all out, to share how we feel, to have the talk. But not every door needs to be slammed to be closed. Some are better left locked and untouched, sealed by quiet recognition, not noise. Because silence is not avoidance. It's precision, it's control. It's a decision to no longer give energy to what drains you. You don't need a dramatic goodbye. You don't need to unpack your healing journey for them to validate it. You're not obligated to justify growth to someone who was only comfortable with your smaller version. Power, real power, doesn't scream. It disappears. It becomes unreachable. And when you stop responding, not just with words, but with attention, they begin to feel it. Not because you're punishing them, but because their influence collapses in your absence. What once felt significant starts to feel empty, and that's the consequence they never expected. People often mistake silence for weakness, but silence is the final boundary. It's what you offer when all other forms of respect have been exhausted. The louder they get, the quieter you become, not out of fear, but out of resolve. You've chosen not to let their noise penetrate your peace. That's not cruelty, that's discipline. Epictetus said, "If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." Silence is how you protect your mind from that trap. It's how you remind yourself that your energy is a privilege, not an entitlement. And what they feel isn't abandonment, it's irrelevance. It's the realization that the person who used to respond, explain, defend, or react is simply no longer available. They don't get access to your emotions, not because you're spiteful, but because you've reclaimed them. The bond is not broken with force, but with stillness, and in that stillness the weight shifts. They no longer shape your narrative. You do, not through resistance, but through removal. This is what most people misunderstand. They think healing means reconciliation, that letting go means writing letters, holding hands, forgiving loudly. But growth, in its purest form, often happens in the shadows, in silence. It happens when you stop asking for someone to treat you better and start treating yourself as someone worth protecting. When you stop proving your pain and start preserving your peace. Because at some point, the desire to be understood is replaced by the desire to be free. By pruning your space, not with rage, but with clarity. By letting go of those who dilute your values, not because you hate them, but because you've chosen to honor yourself. There's a quiet elegance in walking away without turning it into a performance. You don't need applause for protecting your peace. You don't need anyone to understand why you stopped showing up. The people who truly see you won't need an explanation, and the ones who demand one were never listening to begin with. When your silence becomes more powerful than your presence, that's when you know you've shifted. You're no longer negotiating for space. You've created it. You're no longer asking to be heard. You've found peace in not needing to be, and that is a kind of power no one can take, because it comes from within, from the decision to no longer participate in what diminishes you. There will be moments where the urge to explain returns, when guilt creeps in, when you wonder if you should have said more, done more, given them one last chance. But remember this, if they cared about your voice, they wouldn't have waited until your silence. And if they only hear you when you've left, they were never listening in the first place. So let your absence be the closure. Let your quiet be the boundary. Don't fight to be seen by those who looked away when it mattered most. Power isn't in how loudly you leave. It's in how peacefully you refuse to stay. And once you've learned to speak with your silence, you'll never waste breath on the undeserving again. Some doors don't need to be slammed, just left behind. And sometimes, the most powerful message you'll ever send is your silence. If this resonated with you, there's more waiting. Watch one of the videos on your screen to keep walking this path of clarity and strength. Thank you for being a part of Stoic Journal.